I spoke with a retired FBI agent who told me that when an FBI agent shows up at someone's home to serve them with a target letter or something like that 95% of the work, the government's work, is already done in many cases. The question is, what does the mitigation look like for the defendant? Plead guilty, go to trial? That's a fascinating number to hear because so many people presume the government investigation is beginning when the government shows up. To hear that so much of it is done is fascinating. To help us learn more about government investigations, the beginning, it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome our partner, Mike Berlon, back. How are you, Mike?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, thank you so much. Mike is a former lawyer who is on our team, has experience like all of us through the criminal justice system, and really here to provide insights and expertise, both as a former lawyer, but also as a former prisoner. With that said, please like and subscribe, by the way, if you're here. Thank you so much. Walk us through the early stages of a government investigation.
Ordinarily, when the government first starts investigating a case, the person that's the target of that investigation has very little knowledge of it. I mean, there are several devices that the government can use where they can actually contact witnesses or collect documents that require those witnesses to be quiet about it. They're not allowed to discuss it, or they can obtain documents that you would not know about, right? So the government very rarely ever talks to a defendant or potential defendant or target until they have completed the majority of their investigation, right? And that is pretty thorough and sifting. I mean, depending on the type of the case and what the circumstances are, I mean, these investigations, I have been involved with clients where investigations have gone on for 3 or 4 years, and they had no idea that anything was happening until they were contacted by the FBI.
Let's talk about how some investigations begin. What I'm referring to, maybe it's a whistleblower, they get a tip. What are some common ways that a government investigation can begin?
Most criminal investigations, I have found, start with civil litigation. So you may have a situation where someone is sued as a result of a bad investment, or you may have in my case, I was sued because there was money that we couldn't replace that we had promised to a client. When a civil lawsuit gets filed, quite often the United States Attorney's Office pays attention to it, especially if there could be criminal wrongdoing in it. And quite often they will draft behind that complaint because during the course of discovery in those situations, the defendants are often deposed, and they can actually say things in civil depositions that can result in criminal liability. And so the government will quite often hang back and allow those cases to follow through and try to gather information through that discovery process. And so that's one of the areas where it comes up quite a bit. Another area is where they get tips from people, or confidential informants, or other people that suggest that maybe a crime has been committed, and they'll open their investigations based on that kind of conduct. But in the majority of white-collar cases that I've handled, I would say the vast majority of those arose because of civil litigation that was first.
And when you say handle, that's when you were working as a criminal defense attorney. Right. Okay, now Mike is on the other side. In future videos, we're going to discuss really his role with our team and working with the First Step Act, administrative remedies, and all of that. Coming back to government investigations for a moment. In our book, Prepare, and I'm going to put up a link to the first chapter of Prepare in the YouTube description. It's free at White Collar Advice. My business partner, Michael Santos, uses this phrase that he acknowledges he heard elsewhere that says, the best time to plant an oak tree is 20 years ago. The second best day is today. Talk with us about the importance of preparing for a government investigation as soon as you learn about a government investigation.
That's absolutely critical. The timing's critical. If you discover at any point that you're under government investigation, there are several things you need to do immediately, depending on the circumstances. I mean, you might find out because a client or a friend or someone calls you and says, I've been contacted by the FBI, or they may even contact you themselves. But at that point, you have to assume that a majority of the FBI's investigation has taken place, and you need to do whatever you can to try to figure out what the issue is and how you can mitigate that, right? It never gets better. That's the time you need to take action.
And taking action includes working with a competent criminal defense attorney. And help us understand, well, give us some of your thoughts on how someone should go through a vetting process when they learn that they're involved in a government investigation, because you need a lawyer.
You do, and that's a great question, because if you're looking to hire a lawyer, there are several things that you should do. I mean, you're hiring the lawyer to do a service for you, so you shouldn't be afraid to ask any questions. And the first thing I'll tell you is don't rely on reputation alone. I mean, there are a lot of lawyers that have impeccable credentials because maybe they worked in the United States Attorney's Office or maybe they did other things. That doesn't make them an exceptional criminal attorney. It means that they have experience, but it doesn't mean they're an exceptional criminal lawyer. You shouldn't be afraid to ask your lawyer about how many cases they've actually tried. You shouldn't be afraid to ask them for references from other clients, and you certainly shouldn't be afraid to ask them about how they've done in settlement negotiations, because the majority of federal cases involve settlement negotiations.
That's right. One of the goals of managing a government investigation, we think, is not making matters worse. And there are a lot of people who just make rash, quick decisions because they just want the pain to go away. They want it to end. And in so doing, there may not be proper vetting, proper due diligence, the proper asking of questions. And the majority of our cases are white-collar cases, meaning you are not getting arrested and directly out to prison. Even if you are, you're going to make bail pretty quickly. You're not a threat to the community, right? So you have time to do the vetting and due diligence. And you don't want to make matters worse, because we get a lot of calls from defendants who say, not only am I indicted, I hired the wrong lawyer. And I'll say at times, well, you have a really good lawyer. We've worked with him. The problem is you don't really know how to hold a lawyer accountable, which leads to no one should work harder on their criminal case than the actual defendant. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct. There are an awful lot of people that think that if they simply hire the right lawyer or they pay the right amount of money, that there's some way to get out of that. You have to work probably harder than your lawyer if you're working on your own case. I mean, you should be involved in all the decisions. You should certainly understand the process, especially if you're in federal courts. Not like any other. It's not like state court system. It's a highly complex system. You need to be doing you need to be getting character reference letters. You need to be doing the kinds of things that you need to do to protect yourself, because it's critical. There's only a certain body of time that you have to make this work, and so you have to be in a good working partnership with the attorney that you're with.
Going through a government investigation, there are a number of steps between an indictment. Let's presume someone has pled guilty. Between the guilty plea and the sentencing, there are a number of steps. Can you walk our audience through there's a lot of steps.
Sure, there are a lot of steps.
What some of those steps may be?
Well, all right, so from the time you do the guilty plea until the time you get to sentencing, generally in the federal courts is about a 3-month period, okay? And during that time, there are a lot of documents that are prepared. I mean, there are pre-sentencing reports or other documents that are put together. These are all very critical to what's going to happen to you during the course of the case. Those 90 days or whatever period of time you have are the most important 90 days you're ever going to have before you go to prison, and you need to make sure you're on top of it. So you need to make sure at every step of the way, from the pre-sentence report, then once that's complete, then you'll move on to the sentencing memorandums and other documents that are presented to the court. And without going into a dissertation on criminal procedure, the point I'm trying to make is that those 90 days are absolutely critical to what's going to happen to you at the time of sentencing.
Something our team speaks a lot about as we wrap up this video on government investigation is understanding the stakeholders. The probation officer who will interview you in your probation interview, who will then write the report, will probably speak with the U.S. attorney to get the facts of the case. May Google you and read the Department of Justice press releases, may read victim impact statements. In other words, their perception of you may not be great. So mitigation and managing a government investigation, the reason it should begin the day you learn about it is because you've got to work to try to change that narrative, to influence these people that are going to recommend if you should go to prison, and if so, how long you should go to prison for. The mitigation, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if you can embrace that, then you position yourself for a softer landing and a much better outcome at sentencing. The last point I'll make is you can't make matters worse. That would include not working openly with your lawyer. The probation interview, oftentimes defendants will get into trouble if they haven't fully accepted responsibility, if they mislead or hide some financials. They already approach you from the perspective of a criminal, and they may be expecting you to make some decisions that a criminal would make. So You've got to keep that in mind and always be working to change the narrative. With that said, I'll leave it to you for any final thoughts on the early stages of a government investigation.
The early stages of a government investigation are the most critical time. I mean, you can't panic. You need to understand that there's a serious issue, and you need to immediately take whatever steps are necessary to protect yourself, because it won't ever get better. And so that's the critical stage that you really need to make. And if you start early, you can put yourself in a position, maybe not to be successful, but to mitigate what's going to happen throughout the entire process.
That's right. I guess the last point I'll make is what we don't want is additional regret. So there are defendants, you may mitigate to the best of your ability, do everything in the world that you were told to do, that you know you're supposed to do, that federal judges have told you you should do. And in the end, maybe you get a guideline sentence, unfortunately. At least you won't have years or decades of regret. What if I had done this? What if I had done that? Plus the mitigation leading up to sentencing, even if it doesn't give you the exact outcome you want, could be beneficial in prison. We're going to talk about that in future videos. Could be beneficial, that mitigation work on probation, in the halfway house, and so on. So I guess the takeaway from this video is you learn you're in a government investigation. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week working. With that said, please like and subscribe. And thank you very much for taking the time to watch our video. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.